right, well, happy Sunday. Thanks for being with us. Today we are in part 3 of our series entitled Rhythms. We've been spending the first part of this series unpacking the idea of rest. And so we're going to continue on with that. And in a moment, we're going to look to Matthew chapter 12. But I want to take a moment for those of you who are new to Life Center. We want to welcome you and thank you for joining us. We're one church that actually meets in multiple locations with multiple languages across Tacoma. And so thanks for being with us today. As well, before I jump into the message, I want to take a moment to honor a couple of special guests that we have in the house today. Doug and Tasha Myers are missionaries that we support in Ethiopia. Would you stand to your feet really quick? I want to say hello to you. So thanks for being here. When you give here at Life Center, it's going to help further the work both locally and globally. We believe in the mission of Jesus both across the street and around the world. So we're excited to have you guys in town with us. Today, as I said, we're going to look together to Matthew chapter 12. But before we get there, how many of you have ever been guilty of missing the point in life? You ever found yourself in one of those seasons, one of those places? You know, part of this series on rest, we've intentionally designed some practices that we're supposed to do every week because the challenge is we live in a culture that's not very good at resting. If you want to get better at something, you need to practice, right? So a couple of weeks ago, our first practice was to take a couple of minutes each day, and then we made sure we were clear about this, while you're awake, to be still and to be quiet and just have some solitude. How many of you tried that practice out? Anybody try that out? How many of you were successful at it? Okay, good. All right, good. Last week was an interesting one. Last week our practice was driving the speed limit. How many of you, when you heard it, you were like, nope, that's not my calling. I'm not even engaged in that. How many of you tried it? You tried it this last week. You tried to intentionally drive the speed limit. How many of you were somewhat successful? Let's just say that, somewhat successful. All right. It's interesting that that's the practice that we chose. This last week, my family and I, we were away on a little bit of vacation. And as we're preparing to come back to Tacoma from Central Washington, we were in Wenatchee visiting some family and friends. And as we're loading the car to come back to Tacoma, I'm realizing, wait, this is the week that we said we have to drive the speed limit. And I'm thinking about the drive that's in front of me, driving from Wenatchee back to Tacoma, 2 mountain passes, lots of traffic potentially, and I'm thinking the last thing on the face of the earth I want to do is worry about driving the speed limit. I just want to get home. But then another thought popped into my mind that I'm going to have to stand in front of you people and talk about how I tried this practice out. So I don't know who came up with putting that practice on last week, but obviously God has a sense of humor. Because as we began to pack the car, I was kind of coaching myself. I was reminding myself, okay, drive the speed limit. Tyler, you're still on vacation. You're not in a hurry. You don't have to get anywhere right away. Still on vacation. So we load the car. What I neglected to know was that they decided to repave Blewett Pass, which is one of the passes you have to go over. And so as we're heading up Blewett Pass, all of a sudden I see a line of cars that I have no idea where the end of the line goes, and they are dead stopped. And we come to a stop, and my hands are on 10 and 2, and I'm just thinking, okay, I'm on vacation. This is okay. This is okay. Just a few minutes, and we'll get going. Just a couple minutes, we'll get going. And kind of look around the side of the car. Nothing moves. 20 minutes later, I put my car into park. I'm thinking, okay, rest, rest, rest. Finally, the cars begin to go, and I'm like, okay, that wasn't too bad. And then they come to a stop again. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Rest, rest. An hour into this waiting, I look over, and my wife is in the passenger seat, and Amber is doing this. And I look over at her, I'm like, you okay? She's like, I just want to get home. And I said to her, well, it's okay, we're on vacation. We don't have anywhere to go. Sometimes that feedback is not helpful to a person who wants to get home. Because there was this timeline that, she kind of had in her mind, I want to be home around 5, and we didn't get home till 8. And, that's a long time. But here we are, we're actually on vacation. We're supposed to be engaging in these practices. And even in those moments, it's easy to miss the point. Have you ever missed the point? In Matthew chapter 12, we're going to read about a group of individuals who missed the point when it came to this idea of Sabbath. Now, if you've been around church for a while, maybe you've heard that word or you've read it in the Bible. Others of us, maybe we're new to Scripture or new to the church, and so we hear that word and we go, Sabbath, what is that all about? Well, in the Old Testament, this idea goes all the way back to the first book in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. It talks about God's creative process, that God spoke the heavens and the earth into existence, and in 6 days, He created everything we know. And then on the 7th day, it says that God rested, and He set that day aside as holy. It was called the Sabbath day. But then He called His people, the people of Israel, to engage in this practice as well, that once a week, every week, and the Jews, they would practice Sabbath sundown on Friday through sundown on Saturday. That was their Sabbath day. Part of the law was that you weren't supposed to do work. You were supposed to rest. It's interesting, there's a few different commands that you see in the Old Testament. One of these commands about Sabbath, it shows up in the book of Exodus, and the command is trying to help the people understand the creative process that God had in Eden, that rest was available. This was God's ideal. This was a symbol that they were in relationship with God, that they would take time out to experience rest. But a little bit later on in the book of Deuteronomy, there's another command that they would observe the Sabbath. But this one didn't draw their attention back to Eden. No, instead, this command drew their attention back to Egypt. See, what you may not know is that these people, known as the children of Israel, God's people, they had served as slaves in Egypt for 400 years. And during those 400 years, guess what they didn't have? They didn't have a day off. There was no rest. And part of God's command of Sabbath for these people that He loved was to remind them, because they're about to enter the promised land. This is now the land that they're taking charge of, and their propensity is going to be to work. This is our new land. We got to take care of it. We got to get to work. And God is saying, no, I want to remind you, listen, you're no longer under your former taskmasters. In fact, I am giving you this gift of Sabbath as rest in the midst of work that needs to be done. I want you to observe this to remind yourself that you're not in Egypt anymore. You are free. It was a gift. You see, Sabbath was all about rest. It was about being restored. It was about doing good. And yet, here's the challenge. For many of us, Sabbath, the idea of it, it just becomes a date on a calendar, but what we really need to work towards is a state of heart. So many of us were guilty of leaving it as a date that somehow, somewhere, I'll try to accomplish that out there, but really, Sabbath begins in the heart before it ever begins on the calendar. And that's one of the issues that we're going to get down to as we look together in Matthew chapter 12. So I'd love for you to follow along with me if you have your Bible or your phone, or you can look up on the screens. At the end of Matthew chapter 11, Jesus gives this call. We focused in on this a couple of weeks ago. He says, "Come to me, anybody who's weary, and I will give you rest." Can you say give? This idea that rest is a gift is so important, because rest isn't something you deserve once all of your work is done. Rest is a gift in the midst of all of the work that has to be done. Jesus says, "Learn from me, take my yoke upon you, walk with me, labor with me." The very next verse is the beginning of chapter 12. And we see this story where Jesus is walking with his disciples, and it is the Sabbath day, the day that they're not supposed to do any work. He's walking with his disciples, and the disciples and Jesus, they're hungry, so they're plucking heads of grain, and they're eating the grain as they walk through the fields. And the Pharisees, the religious leaders, they see this, and they call out to Jesus, "Hey, that's illegal. You're not supposed to work." And Jesus kind of helps them understand something. Jesus tells them a story about when King David was hungry, and his men, they go in and they find some sacred bread, and they eat what should have been only set apart for the priests. And then Jesus makes this statement after the end of their discussion. He says, "Do you not realize that I am the Lord of the Sabbath?" Interesting. Jesus is saying the one who set this idea into motion, the one who kind of made this plan for mankind, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. And that's where we're going to jump in. We're going to start at verse 9. It says, "Then Jesus went over to their synagogue, where he noticed a man with a deformed hand. The Pharisees asked Jesus, 'Does the law permit a person to work by healing on the Sabbath?' They were hoping he would say yes, so they could bring charges against him. And he answered them. It's interesting, if you look at how Jesus often replies to questions, he replies with another question. I love this. He says, "If you had a sheep that fell into a well on the Sabbath, wouldn't you work to pull it out?" Listen, even though you're committed to all these rituals, all these rhythms, if you had an animal in your family that was a part of your provision, it was your livestock, and if that animal fell in, wouldn't you work to rescue it? Wouldn't you? And the answer is yes. Jesus says, you would, of course you would. Look at verse 12. "And how much more valuable is a person than a sheep?" What's interesting, the Pharisees, they valued the rituals, they didn't always value the individual. It says, "And how much more valuable is a person than a sheep?" Yes, the law permits a person to do good on the Sabbath. I love this. Jesus takes their question, flips it on his head, and goes a completely different direction. They're wondering, are you allowed to work to bring healing in somebody's life? And Jesus says, no, you're asking the wrong question. The Sabbath actually permits you and is focused on doing good. And he goes on. Then he said to the man, "Hold out your hand." So the man held out his hand, and it was restored just like the other one. You got to love this. Jesus doesn't even lay hands on him. He doesn't do any work. He simply speaks the word, revealing that he is God in the flesh. He speaks to this man's condition, and with that simple word, this man's hand is transformed. The Pharisees, they don't like that. Look at this next verse. "Then the Pharisees called a meeting to plot how to kill Jesus." Okay, so think about this. There's a whole bunch of irony in that statement. Think about this conversation. Think about the thread, what's actually going on here. The Pharisees are trying to trap Jesus. It's wrong to work on the Sabbath, right, Jesus? And Jesus is saying, no, it's right to do good on the Sabbath. And they say, okay, because of that, we're going to kill you. Planning somebody's murder is okay, but performing a miracle is not okay. Anybody else see the irony there? I mean, do we not remember the sixth commandment? Do you know what it is? Thou shalt not murder. So they're okay with ignoring commandment 6 of 10. They're just frustrated with the fact that Jesus is here working miracles. Talk about a blind spot. Talk about a challenge. You see, there was a disconnect, and today, the team wanted to remind me how much time I have to preach, so I'm going to get this going here. Forgot to start it early, so we're going to go a little bit long. As soon as that's done, I'll send you out of this place. They told me it's an hour, so we'll see how it goes. I'm joking. We're not going to be here for an hour. Some of you got really nervous right there. But today, listen, we're all capable at different times of missing the point. And today I want to talk about 3 areas that I want to make sure that we don't miss the point. We don't make these mistakes when it comes to engaging in this idea of rest that God makes available to each and every one of us. The first mistake is this, 3 ways that we can miss the point. Number 1, engaging the practice without engaging the heart. You ever been guilty of engaging in the practice void of engaging the heart? It's so easy for us to kind of quote unquote do the right thing, but we're not actually being the right thing. Have you ever noticed this when you ask help from maybe a child and you ask, hey, can you come give me a hand, and you get this? Oh. Anybody ever experienced that? Hey, come help me load the car. I need some help. Oh. What's the problem? Well, the problem is they're doing the right thing. They just don't have the heart connected to what they are doing. When you question them on it, hey, why are you breathing like that? What's going on? Are you okay? Oh. Here's what's funny. It's not just kids who do this. You ever had a conversation maybe with a spouse or hey, could I get your, I'll help you out again. Wow, thank you. Engaging in the practice without engaging in the heart. The Pharisees were excellent at this. I mean, they had the ritual and the rhythm of Sabbath down to a T. They knew the practice. The problem was Jesus exposes what's missing. What's missing is the very heart of why Sabbath and rest was designed. It wasn't designed to be a oppression on people. It was designed to be a liberation for people. And yet they continued to put this burden on people that they themselves could not even handle. You see, there's danger the more and more that we allow ourselves to engage in practices where our heart is not connected. The danger is that we begin to get used to it. We get comfortable with it. And this is especially dangerous, listen, for those of us who have maybe been in church for a while, those of us who have grown up around church. We can so quickly get conditioned to doing all the right practices but not having the heart engaged. That's why at times, if we're not careful, we can be in the midst of a worship moment and everybody around us is engaging and focused on Jesus, and we're kind of going, I don't really like this song. Now, I know that's never happened here, but I'm saying in that moment, here's what's interesting. You're in the right place. You're around other followers of Jesus. You showed up, but the heart is missing. And we need to be so careful not to engage in all the right practices and missing engaging the heart. Here's the second mistake we need to avoid as it comes to this idea of rest. And that's when we treat time only as a master and we miss the meaning. When we treat time as a master. You know, here's the reality in our lives. All of us, we have 24 hours a day. And no matter how spiritual we are, no matter how good we are, that clock continues to tick. And if you're anything like me, I find myself going, I just want time to slow down. I just need a little bit more. Why? Because the demands of time never cease. Keeps ticking, keeps going, keeps moving. No matter what we do, keeps happening. What's interesting, in our English language, we use one word to describe many different things. And so my children, they love pizza and they love me. Hopefully those loves are not the same, but they love both. We love the Seahawks, we love coffee, we love sunny days, we love the HOV lane, we love all of these things. But in the Greek language, they had 3 different words to describe different aspects or facets or kinds of love. There was agape love, which is unconditional love. There was phileo love, which is brotherly love. There was eros love, which was romantic love. We just have love. I love pizza and I love my wife. We have one word. It's interesting, the same reality exists with our word time. And the reality is, listen, so many of us we allow this thing to become a master in our lives. A master. See, in the Greek, there's two words for time. The first word is chronos. It's where we get our word chronology. Chronos, it asks this question: what time is it? What time is it? It's interesting, if you've ever studied Greek mythology, one of their gods was known by the name Chronos. And he was a all-consuming, never-satisfied God. In fact, some artists painted some paintings of this God consuming his own children. Does time ever feel like a master in your life like that? Keeps ticking, keeps going. Have you noticed that we want to slow down time as a culture? Listen, we want to slow down time. Have you noticed that time begins to reveal itself on our faces? Right? We have this desire to somehow slow down, undo time. It was interesting, a week ago or so, I was looking at some stuff online, and all of a sudden I start seeing these photos of my friends, and I'm like, man, they must have had a rough month. What's going on? And then somebody sent this photo to me. That's a photo of me and my wife. And listen, I've seen the original, and I know it's been an eventful few months, friends, but I don't think it's been that, I look at that and I go, man, if we could only avoid that. I showed the photo to Amber and I said, you said for better or for worse. We're in this for the long haul, baby. This is your future. Of course, she looks timeless, doesn't she? Isn't that wonderful? But it's interesting, we have this desire to somehow slow down time. Why is it? Because time is never content. Time, chronos, is always consuming. No matter what happens, minute after minute is being spent. It keeps going, it keeps going, it keeps going, it keeps going. Chronos asks, what time is it? Where are you supposed to be? What's next on the agenda? How are you going to accomplish that? You got to go, 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 go. If you're going to be successful, you got to make it happen. Go, 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 go. And we just find ourselves under this taskmaster called Chronos. But there was a second Greek word. We see this word as well in Scripture. There's this idea of time called Kairos. Kairos asks a completely different question. Kairos asks this question: not what time is it, but what is this time for? Completely different. In other words, we're allowed to create space in our lives, and this is what God wanted to accomplish with the idea of Sabbath. Not running from thing to thing, going, okay, what time is it? What's next? But pausing somewhere in the midst of our week and going, okay, God, what is this time for? And Jesus answered us. He said, the Sabbath is for doing good. The Sabbath is for us being rested and restored and renewed. It's to not just do good for ourselves, it's to do good for others. This is what Kairos asks us. And I want to remind us, listen, every single one of us, we are always tempted to go back and come under this taskmaster called Chronos. Always wondering, man, do I have enough time? Am I going to get there? Am I going to be enough, do enough, accomplish enough? But I want to remind each and every one of us that we don't serve Chronos. We serve Jesus. We don't serve time. We serve Jesus, the King of all time, the King who stands outside of time. And that King looked at you and I, and he saw the need in our lives, and he provided space. A place called rest, a place called Sabbath, where we could be refreshed and we could stop and ask, what is this time for? You see, what could happen on your workplace if you walk there Monday and you walk in, and instead of just going, what time is it, pausing and going, okay, what is this time for? What could happen if we show up at church and we gather together with other followers of Jesus and we don't just ask, what time is it? Tyler, come on, get through this, because I don't want to wait in line at Olive Garden. Let's go. Instead of asking what time it is, what if we asked and we paused, what is this time for? When we're sitting down with our family and we're not just trying to get through the next thing to answer the next email, but we slow down and we go, okay, what is this time for? That's why this practice this week is really important. Because our practice, we're going to set aside driving the speed limit. And everybody said, amen. And here's what we're going to practice this week. For 7 days, we're going to have dinner unplugged. Ooh, some of us didn't like that. Some of us are like, Tyler, if I do that, how will I let people know what I ate? Trust me, the world will keep spinning if people don't see your plate of food. It'll be okay. But for 7 days, I want to challenge us, and I want us to practice this. Turn off the TV, turn off the phones, no devices, and look at the other humans sitting at the table with you in their eyes and have conversation. Slow down. Not asking what time is this, asking what is this time for? What is this time for? I want to encourage us to engage in that practice. Why? Because time isn't your master. Time has meaning if we allow it to have meaning. Here's the third mistake that I want us to avoid. It's approaching Sabbath as a burden instead of approaching it as a blessing. Approaching Sabbath as a burden instead of a blessing. You see, the Pharisees, they had gotten so detailed and so specific, but the problem was they approached it as a burden to lay on people. You can't heal that man. It's the Sabbath. You have different days to heal. Don't heal him now. And Jesus is going, no. The Sabbath is for doing good. The Sabbath is actually for blessing, not for burden. See, the Pharisees had it detailed out and driven, and yet Jesus says, no, you're missing the point. The Sabbath is for doing good. It's for doing good. And yet some of us, when we begin to think about, okay, where do I fit this into my schedule? How do I make this practical? Many of us, we look at our calendars and we go, Tyler, there's no way I can make this happen in my calendar. And I would just encourage you, before starting with your calendar, start with your heart. Because maybe it doesn't work to set aside an entire 24-hour period for you. But could you start with an hour? Could you start with 5 minutes? Let me make this really practical, because maybe some of us, we just need to simply power down our phone, walk outside, look up at the sky and creation for 5 minutes and realize this thing continues to spin and I'm not doing anything to make it happen. Sabbath moment. Maybe you want to wake up 5 minutes early and go for a walk. Now, the moment that I said wake up 5 minutes early, I lost some of you. So maybe you want to stay up 5 minutes late and go for a walk and just kind of be with God. Maybe you need to take a nap. Listen, yeah, come on, I just saw that hand right there. Can I tell you, sometimes one of the most spiritual things you can do is take a nap. I thought about bringing in a whole bunch of carpet squares and just practicing like we were in pre-kindergarten again, you know? Like, all right, everybody, 5 minutes, here we go, lights out. But we need to adjust our rhythms. Why? Because Chronos is not calling the shots. We're not in Egypt anymore, ladies and gentlemen. We don't serve time. We serve the King of the universe. And He created space for our hearts and our lives. As we ask this question, what is Sabbath for? Why is this so important for my life? We need to understand, listen, it's not just about putting it on the calendar, it's about starting with the heart. This is why I read this a number of weeks ago, that there was an ancient Jewish practice when they approached Sabbath. Every Sabbath, the Jews, they would give their children a spoonful of honey. Some of us are like, man, sign me up, that sounds good. But the reason why they did this is they wanted their kids to look forward to the sweetness that Sabbath represented. They would long for that. They would remember the taste. They would remember the flavor, and they would look forward with expectation. It reminds me of what Psalm 34, verse 8 says to us, to taste and see that the Lord is good. Taste and see. You see, Sabbath creates space. We're able to ask the question, what is this time for? And we're able to say, God, I want to taste and see that you're good. And so we're going to do that right now. I'm going to invite us to stand to our feet. The worship team is going to lead us in some worship. And then today, we have some friends getting baptized all weekend long. Last night at our Saturday night service, we baptized 11 people. Earlier today, we baptized another 4 or 5 individuals. And today, we have some people already signed up and ready to go. But as well, maybe you have never been baptized in water. And today you realize, man, I'm a follower of Jesus, but I've never taken that next step. I would encourage you, today is your day. In fact, if you walk your way out those doors, there's a table and some t-shirts available. And you may say, well, Tyler, I didn't come prepared. Well, here's what I will promise you. It's July, it's warm. Eventually you will dry out, I promise. But today we're gonna celebrate as we worship and as we taste and see that God is good. So can we worship together just for a few moments, and then we're gonna celebrate these water baptisms. But let's start by singing this song and declaring this. Like a fire, like a flood, God, come however you want.